Our goal, as I anticipate, it was help you with the legal and funding readiness foundation needed for confidentially launch, position, and scale digital product while preparing for successful investor engagement. So now is the time that I would love to introduce you, because we are very lucky to have with us Ravi Anwar and Nathan Casberry from Alia Global. Thank you very much, both of you, for making the time to join us and to join the finalists, the 12 finalist team that we have from the Create Apps Championship. So really, really grateful. I'm very lucky to have you with us. And please, I don't want to say anything else. Just welcome and thanks a lot. And I hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for such a lovely, warm introduction, Carmen. We really appreciate it. And we are very excited to share this session with you. The session, of course, is the Legal and Funding Readiness for Digital Ventures session. It's wonderful to have you all here. So we will touch very quickly on who we are, and then we'll mainly be talking to you about legal risks, IP, contracts, in the context of funding readiness, of course, and we will also give you some tips from all the VCs and private equity firms we work with around the world in all the major financial hubs. So a little bit about our firm really quickly in about 30 seconds. So we are Alia Global, more commonly known as AG. We are the official professional services provider and official partner of Dubai Chambers, very proudly so, relationship with them, and we are very much dedicated to the vision set out in Dubai's economic agenda D33. We work very closely on supporting Dubai's economic goals and vision. My name is Rabia Anwar. I'm managing partner of our firm, and by profession I'm a lawyer in the UK, the US. I'm a New York bar attorney, and also in the UAE as well. We do a lot of work in the UAE. Most of our time is there now. So let's move on to a little bit about our agenda. We do also, I'll mention, have a few other colleagues here from our firm. So you'll hear from Nathan in a little bit, where he will dive really deep into intellectual property, going through all the different types for you. And two of our other colleagues are also here, Alina and Preksha. And Alina may speak for a few minutes just to support Nathan on her SME subject as well. So, quick summary of our agenda. We'll be with you for the next 45 minutes. We'll spend around 30 to 40 minutes giving you as much helpful content as possible. And if you'd like to ask any questions at all, then Carmen's explained the process. Please do add them to the chat. You can also reach out to us later to ask questions. We will share with you at the end a QR code and an email address, because sometimes during the session it's a little bit daunting to ask questions, and you sometimes think of the perfect question straight after. So let's dive right in. So the first note we would make, and this is the introduction in a sense, is it's really important as you prepare yourself from a legal perspective for funding that you get really comfortable with some of those concepts and definitions. We won't spend too much time on them now. We're happy to do a separate session, but really get comfortable with what is the difference between private equity and venture capital, what is the difference between debt funding, equity funding, and even government grants, for example. How do they work? So get really comfortable with these terms. And if anyone has any questions about them, we can talk about that afterwards as well. Before we dive into IP and legal, one or two things to bear in mind about different types of funding and both legal and commercial implications for those different types of funding. Really bear in mind what your overall goals are here. So for example, if you apply for a government grant, which is a great way to get funding, if you do apply for a government grant, be aware that the purpose of the government grant should already align with the purpose of your business. Otherwise, you may find yourself having to reshape your business's journey to match the purpose of that fund. And this is the kind of point that a lawyer would make. Do read the small print, do understand what the grant is really there for. And if you need a lawyer to review it for you, find one, because it's important to align from the beginning. And just on that, we've got some great longevity and health tech businesses on the line today. I believe we've got Pop by Quelio and Eve and AIA Longeva and ARDXHD. I hope I'm saying that right. Brilliant name. So for those guys in particular, there are some amazing grants for you in Dubai. So if you look into the health innovation grants, the preventative healthcare grants, there's the Doman grant for healthcare research and innovation, Sheikh Hamdan bin Rashid Al Maktoum Health Research Grant, and then also have a look at Dubai Healthcare City Authority grants as well. But do remember the whole time to read the small print as to what the grant is really for, what it's aiming to do, and make sure your business is aligned with that before you apply for the grant. Right. So moving on to contracts over charisma to get funding. So what do we mean by that, right? So it's almost, if you think about when a business is preparing to get funding, they're very focused on that pitch deck, that proposal. And it's all become, especially in this age of social media and visual presentation, it's all become very charisma sometimes over substance. And that's what we as lawyers would slightly guard against. Charisma is important. And yes, absolutely, that pitch deck, that presentation you do as part of your pitch, that proposal, all those things are great. But ultimately, that's not what's going to get you your funding. That will get your foot in the door and it will get you noticed. But ultimately, what investors will do is they will look at the setup that you've got behind the scenes, including, of course, all your legal arrangements, whether it's IP contracts, compliance frameworks, controls. So really focus on those things as well. And we're going to talk to you quite a lot over the next half hour or so about how to do that, about how to get ready. And do also be aware from a sort of infrastructure perspective, investors will want to see that you know what you're going to do with their capital and you're able to articulate it. So once again, this comes back to your infrastructure in terms of being able to articulate what you will do with the funding, not just using the charisma to try and get the money in. So that these are just important sort of introductory points to bear in mind. We would also urge you to carry out risk assessments. And again, we'll come on to how to do this in a bit more detail in a further segment. But essentially, an investor will want to see that you understand the risks associated with your business. So it's great to walk in with charisma and passion and say, this is the best business idea in the world. But you've got to also know what are the pitfalls, where could things go wrong. So really understand your risks, and how you understand your risks is through carrying out a risk assessment. And if anybody wants to, they can get in touch with us afterwards. We may even be able to share a template or two, or at least talk you through on screen how to do a really comprehensive risk assessment, how to create a scoring matrix. We're talking about all sorts of risks, by the way, from, the risk of litigation, the risk that you may be sued, the risks around default of payments, every risk that you can think of, key man risks, which we'll come on to. It's really important for a startup to know who their key men, or these days we should say women, key men or women are, and what risk that creates to the business if that person suddenly isn't there. So are you able to continue your business? What is your BCP or business continuity plan? All those things need to be thought about, and we'll come on to some of them in more detail soon. So we've talked a bit about risk assessments, risk identification, and also risk mitigation. You should also think about credible financial projections as well, which is something that might be covered in the next segment a little bit more as well. So we won't spend too much time on that. So now moving on to the next topic for you. I'm going to hand over to Nathan, who's going to talk to you a little bit about intellectual property, which is slide 3. And also legal entity structuring for investment as well. I think we should definitely cover that, Nathan, as well. But I'll hand over to Nathan. Go for it, Nathan.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We've got a lot of content to get through. And the first one I want to talk to you about is, of course, IP. Now, a lot of you here today, you're founders, you're entrepreneurs, you have a lot of brilliant ideas in your head. And of course, IP is often the single most valuable asset that your business can hold. And it's one of the first things that a lot of investors will examine in your business. So when you think about IP, and particularly the IP that's relevant to things like apps and digital ventures, this might include things that you might have heard of. For example, you've got your patents for your novel processes and technical innovations, and your algorithms where they are in fact patentable. And you've got your trademarks, such as protecting your brand name, your logo, and your product names. You've also got your copyright, so protecting things like your code, your content, and your creative works. Some of you might have trade secrets and confidentiality. So you want to protect your proprietary data, your processes, your methodologies of how you get things moving in your business. And of course, you have your design rights at a later stage when you start to grow and you start to develop your product a little bit more. You then want to start thinking about protecting the visual elements of your product, including things like your user interface or your user experience design. And of course, investors would also want to see that you've protected your IP, or at least, at the very least, actively in the process of doing so. So how you can do something like that is a lot of times, get a good IP lawyer. So your protected IP is great, but if it's not protected, maybe at least consider filing for protection and having lawyers on it, because even if there's no patent yet or the patent is still in the pipeline, having good lawyers in the line, that goes a very long way. So businesses such as Eton Essence, you've got IP value that may sit in your educational content or your gamification mechanics and brand. For ARDX HD, it might sit in your diagnostic methodologies or your data sets. Even for Casno Alia, for example, it may be your proprietary algorithms and your decision-making models. So the type of IP varies, but investors would always want to know who owns it at the end of the day. Now, I mentioned a bit about lawyers just now. So if you've got a lawyer that has filed the relevant documentation, at least your potential investors know that it has been done correctly. So now you might be thinking, okay, what are the key practical actions I myself as a founder can take for my business in terms of IP? So there are a few things that we can suggest. For example, conducting an IP audit. So understand what you own, make sure that each asset is properly documented and done correctly. Ensure that your IP assignments are in place. For example, all your founders, your employees, your contractors, your particular agreements with them should have IP assignment clauses, because this is often missed and can sometimes lead to serious problems when you are undergoing investor due diligence. Also think about the jurisdictions that you are incorporated in and the jurisdictions you want to operate in, because you need to register your trademarks in all of those key jurisdictions. So you might be thinking of like the UAE, the UK, the US, or even Europe. Another point would be to use your NDAs to your advantage, your confidentiality agreements, and your IP clauses in your employment contracts. They should be consistent from the very first day to ensure that all your staff, all your employees, all your contractors, all the ideas in the IP that they come up with, it should always belong to you. And you need to bear in mind that IP protection is not always assessed per feature or per product update. A lot of times it is assessed at the underlying level of your asset itself. So that are things like your code, your brand, your data, and your design. So whether ownership of those assets remains clearly with you as a company as the product evolves, that's something that's very important to a lot of investors. And as your app or your product or your service evolves, you must remember that IP protection should always track the product lifecycle. So every time you launch a new update, you publish a new feature, you have a new iteration of your product, that should always clearly remain owned by your company through robust assignment and your contracting agreements. For some of you who are developing digital and mobile applications, some things that investors might be focused on from a legal angle is whether or not the company retains enforceable rights as your product changes over time and across jurisdictions. Have you got the right to say, hey, no, this is our idea, this is our product, for example? And always remember, IP protection is jurisdiction specific. So your trademarks and your patents, they typically need to be registered in key markets rather than globally by default. And founders should always prioritize protection based on your commercial intent or what you want. So 3 things you should think about as a baseline. Where are your users going to be located? Where is your revenue going to be generated? And where would enforcement realistically take place? So a lot of you are early stage startups, and this would usually be a staged approach rather than a full global registration of all your IP from day one. You have time, but spend that time wisely. So that's a little bit about IP, and we're now going to move on to the next subtopic, which is your legal entity structuring and your compliance. So this is very important, especially as your business starts up and develops, and you plan to grow across the jurisdiction. Of course, a lot of you are probably undergoing this now. You have to choose your correct legal structure for your business at the very first day. So the correct legal structure is one of the most foundational decisions you will make as a business owner or as an entrepreneur. So in the UAE context, you might already know there are three main structural options which you can understand, that being the mainland UAE. So sometimes that's required for certain regulated activities and of course securing government contracts. You've got your free zone entities, which are 100% foreign ownership. You've got specific permitted activities, and also your offshore entities, which is typically used for your structures, your IP holding, or even international businesses. A lot of you are going to be thinking about cross-border business. So this is a common structure in a lot of global, as Ruby mentioned, global environments where businesses are on social media and on the internet. So a common structure for this is a holding company, and you might want to think about operating subsidiaries in different jurisdictions. So why is this something that might be useful? Well, a lot of times it's used to separate ownership, for example, your IP ownership, or you can structure your operational activity and your revenue flow. And of course, you can manage your tax exposure and even simplify your future investment or your exit processes. So this might be particularly relevant for some of the businesses here today, such as Rush, Travella, Jusor, or even ARDXHD. A lot of your users may ultimately sit across multiple jurisdictions from day one. So that's something you can consider as you grow your business in the coming months. Now, on the regulatory side, you've got a few key compliance areas for digital ventures to take seriously. I can list out a few of them, for example, data protection. So you're looking at the UAE Personal Data Protection Law. You've got the DIFC Data Protection Law. And of course, if you're thinking about handling data relating to individuals in Europe, you have the GDPR. And even for financial services, some of you may be doing things like handling payments. You might be thinking about lending or handling crypto or even financial data. There are specific regulatory requirements, and these are significant and jurisdiction specific. So that's something you want to think about as well. And for your mobile applications, you have things like your App Store compliance, your consumer protection, and even advertising standards whereby your mobile application has to comply with your local advertising laws. And lastly, your national security laws. So for some businesses that operate in the deep tech sector, government approval may be required in certain jurisdictions. So I guess a golden rule to remember is compliance is not just the cost. To investors, it is a signal of maturity. And a business that has its regulatory house in order, it tells investors it is run by people who understand the environment they are operating in. And many early stage founders may not yet be physically based in the UAE, or sometimes they might operate across multiple jurisdictions. And in these cases, your structure becomes critical to ensure that there is clear ownership of your IP, control of your contracts, and also a tax efficient scaling. So you should consider things like whether your current structure can scale internationally. What does your business currently look like, and what do you want it to look like in 10 years? Will you require repeated restructurings, which can be both not time effective and very costly? And you should also think about three things in practice which are critical to your business. Where will your company sit as a parent or your parent company? Where will your revenue be generated? And where will your intellectual property be owned and controlled? So those are, I guess, three things crucial when you're thinking about legal entity structuring, and also your compliance with those entity structures. And a next important topic would be your cybersecurity. So in an age of AI and digital awareness, cybersecurity is no longer optional for digital ventures. It's not just a due diligence requirement. I guess in a sense, if you think about it, if your cybersecurity posture is weak, investors and potential acquirers, they will definitely find that out. And you would rather want that to be secure at an early stage than wait for that to arise. So this scrutiny may be particularly intense for a lot of businesses that handle user data or even financial information. or if you have products that are built on API integrations or cloud-based infrastructure, so apps collecting location data, health data, or biometric data, a lot of these will be very private and confidential information, and cybersecurity will be paramount to something, to showing an investor that your business is, secure and set up well. So, for example, many of the startups here in this room today, you might fall into that category. So businesses like Casna, Leah, ARD, AXHD, even Pop by Quailio and Ava, you all involve, or you might involve, sensitive personal or health-related information. And of course, your potential investors, they're going to expect strong security controls and also governance around the data that you manage to handle. So just to give an example of some controls which investors may expect to see as a minimum would be things like data encryption in transit, access controls based on your principle of least privilege, a documented incident response plan, and also your breach notification procedure, a third-party and vendor risk management plan, and also at least regular penetration testing. So you think about risk management and how you can manage any potential risk that might extend well beyond your cybersecurity walls. You have things like financial risks, your operational risks, your regulatory risks, and even your reputational risks. These all need to be identified, assessed, and even managed and documented from an early stage. One way you could potentially do this is having a risk register. So this is a very practical tool which will show investors you have gone through that process quite rigorously. And even some potential things you can think about are directors and officers cover. You can seek to get professional indemnity insurance or have cyber liability insurance. And these are all things that can be bonus points in your book when you're looking to secure funding. If you do not have them, sometimes this might be a gap which will be identified by potential investors. Now, a lot of digital businesses are typically regulated across multiple jurisdictions simultaneously, of course, as I mentioned, due to the borderless nature of your app distribution today. So for mobile and digital applications, another important thing to think about is your compliance obligations. Make sure they are not triggered only by where the company is based, but where your users are located. Where is your data going to be processed? Those are things that are going to tie into your compliance obligations as you grow as a business. And also importantly, you should bear in mind that a single app, you may simultaneously fall under multiple regulatory regimes. This will depend on things, as I mentioned, your user base, your data protection, consumer protection, and even your platform and app store requirements. Okay, so now we're moving on to the next topic, and that's going to be your risk, your contract, and your competitive positioning. This is very important for a lot of new businesses because a lot of new founders and entrepreneurs, you're all very much go, go, go from an early stage. And many successful businesses, of course, have this mindset. But it's critical to balance this out carefully by taking a step back and thinking about your risks. So you may all know the saying, if you're failing to plan, then you are planning to fail. And this is particularly important with risk to your business that may not particularly be obvious at the start, but might arise at a later stage. So one thing you can think about is, again, a thorough risk assessment. This is not just a governance exercise, it is often expected of successful businesses. And when you think about a risk assessment, how do you carry it out in a practical day-to-day stage? So there are three logical stage processes that you can identify to think about carrying out a risk assessment. And the first thing would be identifying your risks. So what are the risks to your business model? What are the risks to your technology team, your market, and your regulatory environment? Now that you've identified those risks, what is the next thing you can do? So that would be assessment. For each of the risks you have identified, what is the likelihood of that risk materializing? And what would the impact of that risk be should it materialize? And then now that you've got your risk assessment completed, the next thing would be to look at your mitigation controls. So what is already in place to reduce each of the risks that you have identified, and what can you put in place to protect yourself from those risks? So how do you protect yourself from those risks? You can have things like a de-risking milestone, which should already be built into your investment narrative from the beginning. You should be able to say to investors, by your Series A close, we will have achieved X milestone, or by month 12, or by post-investment, we will have achieved Y milestone. And how can you do that effectively? Well, one effective approach is to, of course, work with a professional services firm who can help you to carry out a formal risk assessment. And they might use items like a scoring matrix. And in this scoring matrix, each risk will be identified. It will be scored in 2 dimensions, that being the likelihood of crystallization, as I mentioned earlier, so how likely that risk will actually happen, and the severity of the impact if it does crystallize. So why would you want to conduct a scoring matrix upon your own business? Well, that scoring process will force clarity and prioritization across your risk landscape, and it gives you something concrete and credible to present to your investors. If I could summarize it in 4 areas where you should really look into more closely when it comes to risk, that Rabia mentioned earlier, your key person dependency. So think about what happens if a critical individual to your business leaves, someone from your C-suite or top manager that you really rely upon. Think about your technology risks. So your IP, is it genuinely proprietary? Is your technology stack defensible? Your regulatory risk. So is your product compliant in the markets you are targeting? And also your market adoption risk. So think about the problem you are solving. Is it a real problem? Is the market large enough to justify the investment into your solution? So if I could tie it into just 2 of the businesses here today, Trevella and Rush, you are both addressing travel-related friction, but in different ways, of course. And investors might want evidence that your customers genuinely want the solutions that you present and that the market opportunity is large enough to support venture scale growth. And always remember to document everything. Document your risk registers, write down your board minutes, make sure your governance policies have all been set out very clearly, because documentation is the evidence that the work you have been doing over the last few months has been done, and you can show that in black and white to your potential investors. And one of the international lawyers now from our firm will help me on the next segment, which will be about your risk, your contracts, competitive positioning from a different angle. And Alina, if I could now hand that over to you.
Thank you, Nathan.
We've got her. Okay, go for it.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So when it comes to competitive positioning, founders should have a deep, specific understanding of the competitive landscape that they're operating in. That means you should have a precise, detailed picture, not just general awareness. You should be able to name your competitors and explain exactly how you're different from each of them, say in terms of customer reach or in terms of your unique selling point. So you could think, we are one of 8 other businesses doing this in Dubai. The difference between us and company X is that they're using old technology and software. We're doing something similar, but we're using a different technology, which is 10 times more efficient and profitable. For example, if you're a Reed, you should be able to explain exactly how your B2B sourcing platform differs from the existing procurement and packaging providers. If you're Al-Wazl, you should be able to explain why manufacturers and SMEs should use your marketplace rather than traditional sourcing channels. So basically, you need to be clear on 3 things: your total addressable market, your serviceable addressable market, your serviceable obtainable market. So simply put, in other words, this means, firstly, what is the full potential market? Secondly, what is the portion you can realistically reach? And thirdly, what is the portion you can actually capture in the near term? So apart from this, investors also want to understand market timing. Why is now the right moment for your business? So businesses like Leah and Kasna benefit from growing consumer interest in financial wellness and AI-powered personal assistance. Businesses such as Eve and AIA Longeva benefit from increasing global focus on preventable health and longevity. So it's important to understand what exactly has changed in the market to make this the right time for you in terms of, say, the regulatory environment or the technology landscape. So now this is an area where we can provide direct support through our research capabilities. We can help you with the competitive landscape analysis. That would entail who the other companies are, and more importantly, how your business differs from theirs. We also look at market sizing and segmentation, as well as regulatory mapping across target jurisdictions. Now, that's all from my end. I'll now hand the floor back to Rabia for the next segment. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Really interesting. I'm cognizant that we've only got a few minutes left, and then obviously we want to leave at least 2 or 3 minutes for questions as well. So just to close off, I'll touch on a couple of tips for you, other things to think about. So really think carefully about your banking partnerships and banking relationships at an early stage, and do make sure you read the contractual agreements that your banks give you, or even the terms and conditions, and think about it in the context of your business. So for example, if you know that you're going to make a lot of international transactions, before you sign up to a specific business banking account, check that it will, what sort of charges, whether there's any sort of bulk transaction discount or anything that you can negotiate. Because pre-funding, that sort of post-funding, hopefully you won't worry about that stuff anymore, but pre-funding, that sort of thing can be make or break for a business. So really read those terms and conditions very carefully. Check to see if the bank has all the sub-currency accounts that you need. There are some banks in Dubai, most banks in Dubai will give you pretty much most currencies that you could need. There are a few banks in Dubai which are restricted only to domestic currencies. It is a legal regulatory permission that you need to be able to provide accounts in different sub-currencies. So that's something to check as well. And just quickly, because I personally am a banking lawyer, so we do a lot of work with all the banks, it's worth knowing that some, though not all investors, may want to see that you have your business banking account with a traditional domestic bank. So that's the likes of, you know, some of the banks we know very well, like Emirates NBD, maybe FAB, ADCB, we know Citi as well quite well. So those sort of banks can, sometimes it can be a requirement from investors to have that credible traditional banking partner. However, I mean, this is changing quite a lot now as well. There are some phenomenal digital banks. Again, we know Wio, Mashreq Neo, great digital banks which provide a great service. But think about your needs. Do you want a personal relationship manager? Will you be in need of a physical branch at some point for any reason? What are your banking needs? And really read that fine print before you make the decision. Couple of other things, there's so much material, there's so much to talk about here, but a couple of other things to think about as well. As the CEO of a major deep tech business was telling us recently, when you get your investment, make sure that you put that money to work. So when you get your funding, really put it to work. Think about, you know, especially if it's capital that you're not going to immediately deploy and use within your business, maybe you're going to put some of it aside, really make it work for you. Whether that's, you know, fixed deposits, bonds, structured banking arrangements, and that sort of, you know, that sort of a setup from the beginning can be make or break for a business for sure. So we've talked a lot about IP risk assessments, a little bit about contracts as well. Cognizant that we've got sort of 4 or 5 minutes left, but we'll just move on to the very last slide. We'll skip ahead, and it may be that if somebody wants any more detail on any of this, you're welcome to reach out to us separately. What you can see on the screen now is a couple of QR codes. One is for you to reach out to us if you have any questions, you want to understand a bit more about IP or risk assessments. We're happy to take you through the risk assessment process for your, and it can be different for every business. So please feel free to scan or email us, scan the QR code or email us. The second one, if it's of interest, if you're looking to expand your network, the second one is so that you're able to, if you'd like, follow us on LinkedIn so you can see future events, opportunities. And I will take just a really quick minute, I think we've got a few left, to talk about the importance of business networks and communities. You know, it's there's a saying, your network is your net worth. And it sounds like a soundbite, but it's actually incredibly true. And it's not just in terms of being able to find investment or being, you know, popular. It's also a way of managing your legal risks. And let me explain how. So if a supplier relationship, let's say your business is dependent on a specific supplier relationship, and if that supplier relationship breaks down or that supplier becomes insolvent, goes out of business, what does that mean as a knock-on impact on your business? Does that mean your business stops? No, it can't mean that, right? So you've got to have the network, you've got to have it on your phone, in your emails, where you can call alternative suppliers, alternative providers. The same thing goes for a key man risk, which we talked about earlier. You've got to have within your network a range of other people who you can call, who will help you to fulfill your contracts, because of course if you can't deliver and fulfill your contracts, there's a risk of being sued or a litigation risk. So there's a number of reasons why it's quite important. It's also, we'll be moving on to more pure funding readiness in the next segment. I think investors want to see that you are not operating in isolation. From all the Ps and VCs that we talk to, family offices, ultra net worths, they all sort of want to see that it's not just a vision in a corner. It's actually been executed, implemented, and it's tough. And what I mean by it's tough, I mean that it's strong, that if there is a risk, you can mitigate it. If one key employee goes missing, you can replace them. If one supplier goes missing, you can replace them. If one freight or logistics operator goes missing, and obviously that's a little bit less relevant for digital ventures, but the digital equivalent of that, you've got to have alternatives ready so that you can carry on doing what you need to do, and your businesses, the key phrase is that your business is resilient. And that's probably the thought I'll leave you on. So please feel free to get in touch with us. Thank you so much for your attention. It's been a pleasure to explain these very important issues for you. We wish you the very best of luck with your businesses. All the best. So Carmen will hand over to you with a few minutes for questions if there are any.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Rabia. Thank you very much, Nathan. And thank you very much, Alina. So now is the time for questions. So please, if you have any question, now is the opportunity. Take advantage that we have the full team here ready to answer your questions. So please feel free to type them on the chat or raise your hand. And you can ask any question that you might have regarding the topic. Obviously, it has been very insightful and you share so many things. But in the meantime, that someone asked, I was listening a lot of do's. You should do this, you should do that. So obviously, we also like to know what the don'ts, no, not only the do. So if you can tell us, Rabia, and if you can share now, what is the biggest legal mistake that you see or you most often see on app startup when it comes to IP, that will be great. So that will also help to know what to avoid.
That's a fantastic question, and lawyers love telling you don't. We love saying don't do this and don't do that. So no, it's a really good question. I think one of the biggest don'ts is the early shortcuts that sometimes businesses take, where you mentioned IP. So sometimes you see a successful business model out there, or even just capitalizing on the logo and the imagery. Really check to see if you're infringing or violating anyone else's IP rights, because it becomes a very expensive mistake. And yes, you will make some money in the short term because you'll be capitalizing on the goodwill generated by another company. This has happened to some of our clients, by the way, who started their journey and they've just been so successful. The trajectory has been so steep and so fast, and they've sort of been in the process of sorting out their IP, but they just haven't got round to it. And then what's happened is, because they've gone ahead with marketing, they've had the exposure, they're out there, and it's almost like saying, here, come and steal from me, I haven't protected. It's like not locking your car, which in Dubai you don't need to, but in some countries you do need to lock your car. So I would say that sort of temptation to take a shortcut and make a little bit of money in the short term by leveraging other people's ideas, be very careful with that strategy. It does happen in business, it does, but just we would say to avoid it.
Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Anna. It was connected a little bit with another question that I thought, because just for you to know, all the finalists, they have the idea and they've been working on the prototype and they successfully launched their MVP. So that was connected, like, when is the right moment, no? It's now everybody's busy on the app development and they are adding new features, new improvement, as well as they are trying to get their first clients, get traction. So when was the right time, no? Is at what stage should an app not think seriously about IP protection?
So fantastic question, and I think it's so important because people usually get it wrong. They usually start too early, or most people do it too late. So I think the moment to do is when you realize that you've got something proprietary, you've got something worth protecting that could be stolen. Not everything can be protected, by the way. If it doesn't meet certain criteria, no matter how special you think it is, it might not be worthy of protection from a legal perspective. So A, when you realize you've got something valuable that's proprietary. B, when you've got the money to do it, that's the other thing. And C, and it's not as expensive as you would think, by the way, but it's not.
That was the third question. It's very expensive.
Yeah. I know we're in sync. It's not as expensive as you would think, but yes, it's not free to get your IP protected. Each registration and the service providers that you have, you may need accountants, but more of you're going to need lawyers, but you may need other professionals as well. So so I would say it's those two criteria. And the third criteria is when you are ready to launch or be public facing and exposed. What do I mean by that? So at the development stage, which may be where some of you guys in the audience are, you might still be at the stage where you haven't launched out to the public. So nobody yet knows what your IP would be or what your logo, your brand. No, it may be that for some of you, it's not yet you've not had that big launch. At that stage, what we would say is if you haven't yet worked out, if you've got something proprietary and you haven't yet got the funds to protect it, then what you should do instead is just get some really good NDAs and other contractual protection in place with everyone who's working on your app. Even if that's app developers, there are horror stories of app developers who then, while they're developing the app that is your idea, think, oh, this is great, I could make some money out of this. And then they go away and do a breakaway project using your idea. So you need to have a lot of good sort of clauses, very airtight clauses in those contracts. Be careful who you work with as well. People sometimes outsource that sort of work to a country they've never been to because the development of the app will be done less expensively if it's somewhere else far away. But the price you may pay for that is you won't have as much supervision or control. And the legal frameworks and protections in that country might not be as strong and as efficient as Dubai's. I mean, Dubai's frameworks are very, very good. They're fast evolving. So that's it from us. We hope that helps. We know the next segment's supposed to start, so we don't want to eat into it.
Thank you. Yeah.
If there are any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us later.
Yes, please. So I just wanted to check if there is anyone who want to ask a question. So risk register components we have from Faisal. Can you please touch briefly about that, Rabia?
Of course, yeah, I'm just cognizant. I want to hear from Eraser Capital as well. I'm really excited about it. So in terms of risk register components, it might be easier to show you actually if we do. So Faisal, please feel free to reach out to us and we might sort of put on a screen and show you some examples or do like a whiteboard session where we create one for you. But essentially when you're cataloging the risks, you want to understand the nature of the risks. So, and then also what would happen if that risk crystallized. Crystallize means if it occurs, if it takes place. So let's say there is a risk in your business, you've got a lot of payments that you have got coming in from your customers, and you think that some of those customers, there's a risk of default. Customer payment default. So you start by identifying the risk, which you've done, then categorize the risk in terms of what type of risk it is, then look at the impact, how severe, so this is now risk assessment terminology, but how severe would the impact be if that risk actually crystallized? And then you look at the likelihood, so you can, if you want, you can cheat and write these down and create your own risk register. So you could put your likelihood column next of, how likely is it that that risk will crystallize? And what I mean by that is there might be a risk which would completely destroy your business, but the odds of that risk crystallizing are tiny, something minute, like 0.001%. So should you dedicate all your energy and resources and funds to just mitigating that one risk? Maybe not, because it's the tiniest likelihood that it would ever happen. Then there might be another risk where it's very likely it will happen at some point, but the impact of that risk, the severity is nothing. It might be that, a certain customer or customer base leaves, but you've got a massive sort of 99% of your base is something else anyway. So you absorb that risk, you take that risk on. It sounds from far away, risk assessment sound like a really dry, boring subject, but actually you've got to be really on top of them. And you've got to also be able to show investors that you really understand them, because investors want to know, if I'm giving you some money, I know that you're saying it's all going to be great, but what could go wrong? And if that does go wrong, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to fix it that same day? So risk, I'm really glad Faisal asked the question. It's a really important question. I hope that helps. You can write those headings and start. There's a few more headings, but yeah, a risk register is a really important thing for every business to have.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much, Rabia. Thanks a lot.
Got another one? How do you really define? I'll let you come and go for it.
Yes, I can read quickly, but I'm just conscious with the time. That's why I asked. Anyone has question? Nobody. So now let's do quickly because we have Elliot from Orasella waiting. So if you can briefly answer this question. I know that you share already your email, so maybe the participants also can get in touch with you later. But if you can answer, how do you really define the intellectual property in deep tech? If it is a concept of a term or ideology, because it can be really confusing.
The concept of intellectual property in deep tech. Deep tech is one of our favorite topics, but I'm really because I could talk for about 20 minutes. We did have some material.
We don't have 20 minutes, unfortunately.
I know. And when lawyers start talking, we really talk. So I'm gonna, how do you define I suppose in 2 seconds, how do I define the concept of IP deep tech? So it's a phenomenal question. I'll tell you why, because deep tech is such a new space in a sense that how do you prove that what you've got is proprietary is really the question. So it is very much on a case by case basis. So whatever the questions disappeared from the screen, so I can't see it, but whoever it is who asked that question, if you're trying to work out if your deep tech business has any proprietary information worth protecting, if it's truly novel, so that's one of the key legal terms. There are a few other criteria. It may well be the case that it is proprietary because it's such a new space. What I would say is show someone who works in the space, whether it's us or someone else, and we will be able to do an analysis or review and work out for you if it's proprietary or not. I'm not sure where the noise is coming from. It's not me, by the way. Great.
Sorry, it wasn't you. I have to do mute. It was so. Thank you very much, Rabia, once again. So again, to the full team, thanks a lot for joining us today. It was very insightful. So now we will move to our next panel that we have funding readiness and investor engagement. We have today with us Elliot Joyd is the head of program from Orasella Capital. So hi Elliot, we can see you. Yes. So thank you very much for joining today, and apologies for the tiny delay to hand over to you. I will mute myself, and we are looking forward to hear.
Excellent, no worries at all. I was attentively listening to my colleagues there from the legal side, and it was very interesting. So kudos to you guys, you're all very well versed. I will be complementing my colleagues' comments and perspectives from an investor standpoint, and I will be sharing a short presentation. Before I get into it, I would love to know who's on the call. We've obviously got 4 or 5 lawyers. Can everyone spend a maximum of 7 seconds introducing yourself in the chat? Hi, I'm this, I'm building that. There's no point in me speaking to myself on a Zoom call for an hour, or 45 minutes. If no one answers, then I'm assuming no one's here and it's just...
No, I'm here. I can answer always.
But if you're, I want to make sure that I'm covering what you want. This is not my time. This is your time as founders. So Aggie from Rush, brilliant introduction there. Mark, okay, I know exactly what you do. I know how you make money. Very good. Mike, team LeoPay. What does LeoPay do, Mike? Okay, B2B platform connecting small businesses with packaging, printing. Very good, very specific. Nice to meet you, Muna. Sarah, good to meet you as well. Sumi, thanks for joining. We've got Sindhu from an interesting company with brackets and X's and capital letters. Maybe worth changing the name of that company, but that's a side note. Diagnostic tool for ADHD, very clear. Isan. Okay, this is good. So clearly, thank you very much, everyone, for introducing yourself in the chat there. If you haven't managed to, please do. It really helps me tailor my content to you, and also hopefully you guys connect with each other and see who else is potentially a client, an investor, an advisor, or a mentor, or at least a friend that you can build alongside of, to, from, and with. So with that, I think the initial impression there is that your short elevator pitches there, despite being on a chat and despite not necessarily preparing oneself for doing so, were really spot on. I'm solving this problem for this person in this capacity, and inferring or adding to that if you need to, but if not, inferring this is how we make money. That's what in a VC is all about. And I'm going to take a moment to introduce Oracea Capital. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about today about how investors make decisions and how you as early stage entrepreneurs can decide whether you're ready for investment and or whether you should approach investors. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have questions throughout, just fire away. So before I get into it, it's fair to say that the VC landscape around the world is full of a lot of smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of people who talk the talk and less who walk the walk. But at Oracea Capital, we are indeed a $136 million fund based in Dubai. We are the VC arm of DIEZ, Dubai Integrated Economic Zones, which on a side note announced that 16% of all of Dubai's non-oil GDP flows through DIEZ. We are a fund that invests from pre-seed to Series B. We are the most broad institutional fund in the UAE. And we are sector agnostic, investing in startups that have a clear nexus and relevance to the UAE. That could be in the UAE, out of the UAE, or through the UAE. What I'm also very, very proud and pleased to share with you is that not only are we the most broad investor, investing from pre-seed all the way to Series B, with ticket sizes on the left there of roughly $150,000 up to $3 million on the far right side. But we are also recognized as the #1 most active investor by number of deals in the UAE in 2024 and in 2025. So let's see what 2026 brings. In fact, just in the past couple of weeks, we've completed 15 more investment committees. So you can see that we're indeed not just talking the talk, but walking the walk, and hopefully know a thing or two around traits and tickers and indicators that make a startup more appealing or investable than others. At pre-seed and seed stage, we run our internal investment program called Sandbox. I'm responsible for this. The reason I'm on the call today is because I understand that the majority of you are at the pre-seed or seed stage, or indeed possibly earlier. And so it's worth informing you that Sandbox sort of serves as the gateway into Oracea Capital at those earliest stages with $150,000 investment at your latest valuation. You may be in a cohort of 15 startups, perhaps your valuation is 2 million, and the founder next to you is a bit more mature at an 8 million valuation, and the founder next to her is perhaps at a 11 million valuation, and so on. So we match the most recent valuation. We run Sandbox in a cohort by cohort capacity, 2 cohorts a year, and we are now scouting actively for our September-October cohort. It's important to note that if you are indeed at late seed, pre-Series A, Series A or Series B stages, then we can invest directly without the need for Sandbox. And there's a wealth of information, guidance, investor readiness preparation that is shared, and also exposure to investors, world-class domain experts, and much, much more. You can check out Sandbox by Oracea online to find out some more. But that's us in a nutshell. Pre-seed to Series B investor, most active in the UAE investor, 150K to $3 million dollar tickets. The goal is to do a high volume on the left side and a lower volume on the right side. And we can reinvest. That's what's really important to mention here. We're not a one ticket wonder. We can invest at your pre-seed and then double down in your seed, miss your Series A and then lead your Series B, for example. As I mentioned, the number one most active investor in the UAE. So hopefully that's a decent introduction into who we are and why we're here, and hopefully why we can help. So today's agenda is actually only going to be part 1 and 2 of this, because I believe you're well, based upon what I've seen in the chats, well covered on your elevator pitch. So no need to go through part 4. Part 3, Carmen mentioned to me that you've already covered. So I'm going to go extensively through part 1 and 2, and I will be open for questions throughout. Note that this is an interactive session. And if there's no questions, I'll just keep talking. But indeed, I would urge you to ask questions. With initiatives like this, you get out what you put in. It's as simple as that. If you haven't got a plan or intention for being here today, you shouldn't be here. If you've got a plan and intention for what you want to get out of today, who you want to meet, what questions you want to ask, what knowledge you want to prevail and unlock, then good. And that's not just for this call. That's for every initiative that you'll ever adventure on in your startup life. Reason being, because as founders, you are pulled in a million directions per minute, and you've got to prioritize. No, not worth my time. Yes, that is worth my time. Don't only think about ROI, return on investment. Think about ROTI, not the bread, ROTI, return on time invested. Where am I going to get the biggest return on my time invested? Is being on this webinar today going to help me? Is being at this conference going to help me? Is exhibiting at that event going to help me? Is traveling to Saudi for this client meeting going to help me? And so on. So really ask yourselves why you're here today, what you want to get out of today, and make sure that you're active in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself if you've got any questions throughout. Let's get into it. So how do investors think? I would have preferred to have prepared some animation for this, but frankly, let's just dump it all on the screen. Firstly, please read this article. This article was written, nearly 20 years ago, 25, nearly 30 years ago now, from Harvard Business Review. And it is just as applicable 30 years later. We at Oracea Capital see between 200 and 400 startups a month. There are venture capital firms that see more than that. If you, as a startup, do not understand the business of your investor, you're already lagging behind. If you want to be heads and shoulders above the other opportunities that are being presented to investors, make sure you understand their business. And an article like this, and studying the business of venture capital, how funds are structured, the life cycle of funds. Hello. All right. Thank you for that. The life cycle of funds, how funds are built to hopefully return funds to who's involved, the stakeholders, the impact of carry, and so on and so on and so on, and recognizing the odds pertaining to that, you're already going to be heads and shoulders above others. So please focus on understanding the business model of your investors, whether that's VCs, whether that's angel networks, whether you're taking a grant from the government or from charities, whether it's pro bono work, whether it is sweat equity, or indeed whether it's a loan and debt from banks or other institutions. In this case of VCs, we operate in an outlier industry. Everything about VC is an outlier. Outlier odds, outlier success rates, outlier returns, and outlier chances. 7 out of 10 VC funds return nothing. That's because 9 out of 10 startups fail within 3 years. And on a side note, 70% of the reasons startups fail within 3 years come down to 2 simple reasons. 1, running out of cash and poor cash flow management. And 2, building something that no one wants. So if you can avoid those 2 things, again, you're already head and shoulders above the other startups out there, particularly if you can get past the 3-year mark. We're asking ourselves fundamentally, can this 10x? Can this 100x? Can this maybe 1,000x? These are not typical S&P returns. This is outlier returns. And the whole industry of VC is an outlier model. So it's important to recognize that. Are you the outlier that can potentially create the 10, 100, or 1,000x that VC commands? I'm not going to go through every single bullet point, but I will go through a couple of main ones. At Orsia Capital, we are sector agnostic and we only invest at pre-seed to Series B in startups, technology startups that have a nexus and relevance to the UAE. If you are a Series C stage founder in France building something for Europe, we wouldn't invest. It doesn't fit our investment thesis. Does that make sense? The same applies. Maybe there's an investor that only invests in female-led founders at pre-seed stage building something in health tech or ed tech. If you're a male founder building fintech at late seed or Series A, don't approach them. It's a misalignment. So make sure you do your homework before you reach out to VCs on understanding their thesis. And as you're doing your homework, the best way to learn about VCs and the perception of VCs and the helpfulness of VCs or their lack of is to speak to founders who have spoken to them before and or speak to founders that have received investment from them. In our case at Orsia Capital, we have over 60 startups in our portfolio. Everyone talks about product market fit. I'm jumping to the third point here. But I'd like you to really start thinking about a new phrase that I've coined, which is problem solution fit. All startups that I meet, not all of them, maybe 9 out of 10 startups that I meet, jump straight to their product. Look at this feature. Look at this security. Look how fast this is, and so on. Their product is what they love and obsess about. But actually, they've got it completely swapped around. I would suggest that all of you love and obsess about your problem. Become a world-class domain expert in your problem domain. Understand the problem more than anyone else, and you will be able to outcompete and out-strategize and outperform your competitors better than anyone else as well. So if you have 3 buckets, your problem, your solution, and then your product, love and obsess about your problem. Your solution is your hypothesis on the problem. Like that, but don't be cemented in that, because it may be wrong and you may pivot and evolve your solution, your hypothesis, your conclusion. And then your product is a material example or material translation of your solution. And your product, guess what, is going to change today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and next quarter, and so on. And if it doesn't, then you're going to be outcompeted anyway. So as a result of that, be agnostic here to your product. Like, but be obsessive with your solution, and then love and obsess around your problem. Very, very important. We then look at, just as I mentioned in the elevator pitches at the beginning, we look at who's building this solution, what is the problem, how painful is the problem, who is experiencing the pain of the problem, how many people are experiencing that pain, what solutions are out there today that solve that, how is this opportunity different to those solutions, better, cheaper, faster, more efficient, have a better satisfaction rate, or so on. And ultimately, can this scale? Do the captains of the ship have the ability and skill set to scale this solution beyond one geography and keep and retain customers? These are things that we're constantly asking, whether I'm looking at a fintech or an AI startup, health tech startup, or otherwise. I'm constantly asking. Okay, don't know what happened there. Can you hear me again?
Yes, we can hear you. We lost you for a second, but we can hear you and we can see you, Elliot. No worries.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Guys, don't forget, please message in the chat if you have any questions. Feel free to interrupt as well. Otherwise, it's just me seemingly speaking to my laptop. Right, let's get back to it. These things are fundamental whether I'm evaluating a healthcare startup, an AI startup, a fintech startup, or otherwise. We're evaluating risk, and we want to see the highest potential upside with the lowest potential downside overall. And it's your job to navigate that journey, to showcase that highest potential upside, whilst being in control of mitigating the downside. Defensibility was already covered by one of my colleagues, but I'll emphasize it. Defensibility and your moat is very important. How are you different? It's not just that you have something faster or cheaper, but actually stickier, more loved, more appealing. It solves the problem in a better, more efficient capacity than your competitors. You don't just want to have clients. You want to have fans and ambassadors. You want these people to become advocates of your product and of your startup, such that they then become salespeople, indirect salespeople. They're paying you and they're advocating you. That is the creme de la creme of customer engagement. So how can you do that? How can you serve that customer experience that is beyond world class whilst remaining competitive and defensible? And we ask ourselves that as well. Can they do that? Maybe they're defensible in their product and their tech, but actually their customer service isn't there yet. Does that mean you're not investable? No, it does not mean that. It just means that perhaps there's an area of concern or risk or weakness that needs to be looked at, investigated further, analyzed further, or indeed explored further to either make a decision for or against. And remember, if you get a no from an investor, that doesn't mean no forever. That generally just means no for today. Our job is to return funds and build a portfolio that offers outlier returns. And part of that may be saying no today, but revisiting you in 6, 12, 18 months. And that's fairly common, particularly as you progress. So just because you receive a no from a VC, then don't consider that as, I never ought to speak to them again. In fact, on a side note, a very good habit that all of you should be implementing if you are thinking about fundraising, whether today or in a year's time or 2 years' time, is updating investors on a monthly basis with a newsletter. BCC all the investors that you've met on this journey, and don't necessarily expect a response, but showcase the progress you're making month on month and the traction and what milestones you've achieved and some of the hypotheses and theses that you have proved successful, and also hypotheses and theses that you haven't, that you thought was right but is wrong, and what have you learned from that. And if you can do that, then you remain front of mind. Out of sight, out of mind. Remember that. So investor updates are very useful. Now, don't just find an investor list of 1,000 investors and BCC them all and reach out cold. No, if you've met someone at a webinar or you've met someone at an event, you can either ask them, can I add you to my investor updates? Most, like 99 times out of 100, they'll say yes. Because again, it's interesting. This is their job. It's their job to keep an eye on deal flow. And if you've met them or you haven't met them, but you've engaged with them, then again, adding them in a cold capacity is less preferable, but at least you can dampen that cold outreach by saying, we met at this event, and this is why I'm reaching out, and here's my latest update for your consideration. Don't expect a response, as I alluded to, but at least they can digest it in their own time. And if they are interested, they'll reach out. That's their job. The most important point on this slide is the cap table, and that's why I put it in capital letters. The cap table stands for capitalization table. It is very simply who owns how much of your startup. Make sure that your cap table is clean. You're very fortunate that you're in early stages of your startup growth. Just as one of my colleagues mentioned, ensuring IP assignments are watertight, nice and early. It's one of those things that people kick down the road and they'll get to eventually. Cap table and cap table dynamics is exactly the same. Nip it in the bud, get on top of it, stay organized, make sure that you're protecting your equity very safe and safeguarding it very strongly, but also make sure that when you do bring on investors and or advisors that are supporting in an equity-based capacity, it's very, very measurable value that they are bringing. If you over dilute too much too early, it will nip you in the bud in the future. Secondly, as a rule of thumb, pre-seed and seed, you want to dilute roughly 20% each time. Series A, another 20, and Series B, if you can get to Series B with about 50% ownership as co-founders, it's very, very good. That's a rule of thumb. The good thing is your cap table is not a tattoo. It's not permanent. It can be changed and evolved, but it's expensive, it's bureaucratic, and it requires a lot of administration. And if I'm investing in your startup, I want to invest in your product, your team, and your go-to-market efforts, not in legal fees, not in administration and things like that. So if you can have a good governance and have good habits, keeping your cap table clean, making sure your IP assignments are all dotted, I's dotted and T's crossed, nice and early, and set that good cadence and precedent of being organized, it's going to save you tens of thousands of dollars in the future, most likely. And the discipline in itself stands out. I'm not going to go through the rest of the bullet points. Any time for questions? Faisal asked, what traction signal matters the most to you at pre-seed? Okay, so traction. The pinnacle of traction is recurring revenue. A handful of people or thousands of people who are willing to pay you on a monthly basis blindly, like a Netflix subscription. Then from there, the type of revenue, the type of traction varies. At the earliest stages, pre-seed or pre-launch, let's say your pre-revenue, traction can be, we have website visitors. Let's look at our daily website visitors, how they're changing. We have followers on our social page. Not ideal, but again, it shows that there's some form of attention being showcased there. It could be waiting lists. People are waiting for our product to launch. It could be email lists. People are following us, leaving their email address. It could be pre-sales. We're launching our product in 5 weeks' time, and we've managed to get 2,000 people to pay us 50% up front, and they're getting an offer. And so we got cash in the bank. These sorts of things can also be evidence of traction. But ultimately, what matters most is growth. Positive indicators in whatever metric you're measuring is important. Okay, thank you, Faisal, for your question. Next slide. Okay. I was going to say, put your hand up if you have seen this before, but obviously we are all behind screens. So if you have seen this before, you'll know exactly what I'm about to get into. If you haven't, it's really important to know. This green line represents the lifespan and life cycle and journey of a startup in theory, okay? It's theoretical. The bit below the x-axis is known as the valley of death. And I wonder if I can use my pointer. Yeah. This part is where we start. It's you and your ambition and your naivety and excitement. And then you've got to invest some money, okay? And maybe it's your money. Between 1 and 2, point 1 and 2, perhaps your friends and family invest and support. And then as you reach this critical point here, this inflection point, yes, you are the furthest away from the x-axis. But actually, the gradient starts to turn positive for the first time between 2 and 3, roughly 2.8 here, where my laser is. And that is very important. What that shows is that you've managed to build a product and get product market fit. And as you start growing, what you'll notice is the gradient gets steeper and steeper and steeper. And actually, VCs command not only this level of steepness, but possibly this level of steepness, as you can see. And the goal that, as a founder is to be able to navigate this valley of death as short and as shallow as possible. So if you can, rather than going all the way down like this and up, perhaps you can just go shallow and up like that, then that would be fantastic. Why 0.4 is really exciting for investors. That's break even. That is where you are able to grow without and sustain without the need for external investment. So your goal is to approach 0.4 as soon as you can. And I will say, Frankly, if you can get to point 4 without the need for any external investment, amazing. Then don't, and if you can afford to grow, not necessarily as steep as this, but you can afford to grow like this without the need for taking on investment, it's a very strong, there's a strong business case for doing so, in which case VCs and external investors may not be relevant for you. And that allows you to retain upwards of 100% of your company in your cap table. However, maybe you get to this point and taking on external investment allows you to grow much quicker in the gradient of the green line rather than perhaps at a 30-degree angle here or so. And that may be what you want. However, please recognize when you take on investment from investors, angel networks, family offices, high net worth individuals, family and friends, VCs, even banks or otherwise, there's no such thing as a free lunch. And there are always terms associated to the investment, and those terms always favor the investor before the founders. My colleague mentioned the importance of finding which bank is right for you by looking at the terms and conditions. The same applies with taking on investment. Make sure you know who you're going into business with. Make sure you know why they're going to business with you, what they care about, and make sure that they are going to be strategically helpful in getting you from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and so on. Ideally, you want an investor who can invest in stage 2 and then reinvest in stage 3 and then reinvest in stage 4 and then perhaps exit in stage 5, so they can actually support you in this journey rather than just investing in point 2 and you never hear from them again. Equally as important is someone that you can call not only in the good times and say, hey, Orsia Capital, we're doing great, look at this, look at this, look at this, but also someone you can call in the bad times and go, hey, Orsia Capital, I'm struggling on this. This is a real problem. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to make payroll this month. One client has gone bust. They still owe us this amount of money. And so those are very real examples. And you want to be having investors on your side that can support you, not just with capital, but with knowledge, with network access, and much more, and often emotional support through the good times and the bad. What I also want to add here is that this green line is theoretical, as I mentioned. The reality is this. This is the reality. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. But frankly, the majority of and you don't know, so you're navigating that cycle, and there's the high highs and there's low lows. It's important you have a good team of people and supporters and investors and advisors available to help you navigate that. The other reality, if I put it in perhaps a blue line, is that most startups do this. They get to here and they flatline and they die in debt. Some startups maybe get to this point and then they die. So as I mentioned at the beginning, 7 out of 10 VC funds return nothing, 9 out of 10 startups fail. If we invested in one startup, it would be gambling. But if we invest in 60 plus startups like we have at Orsia Capital and we continue, and maybe the year we will have 80 startups, who knows, then what we're doing is we're building a portfolio and we're mitigating our risk. And that's very important. And we recognize that a handful of the 60 plus will end up in the blue line, but we hope the majority will end up in the green or the red, where they're making very positive growth. All right. In summary, navigate the valley of death as short and as shallow as you can. Any questions? Faisal, any other question? You did ask a question. It was a good question. Carmen, how are we doing on time?
Any other question? Please take advantage, raise your hand, because we have the opportunity to have with us today Elliot. So please, if you have any question, I don't know if you have more slides prepared. If not, I have a few questions. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, Khalid. Yes,
Yeah.
please.
A very good evening, Elliot. Thank you so much. It has been a really great experience listening to you. A very important question I'm feeling to ask right now is what is the difference point? Like, what is the point where we have to draw a fine line between when we are talking about the market or the problem or the business model, as you told previously, and when to pitch for the technical part? Like, let's suppose we are sitting in front of investors and VCs, and we are talking a lot about, business model, problem, GTM, and everything, how we are going to make money, how we are going to be in the market. And then we have to talk about the technicalities as well, because that's a very important perspective. That's one of the strongest point we have, how we have developed everything, how our architecture is different, how fast it is, what different AI models we have built. So now where to bring all these things, like when to switch for the technical part and when to go for this business oriented part, if I'm pitching to an investor or VC.
Okay, great question. An investor is fundamentally there to make outlier and exponential returns. Can you hear me, Khaled?
Absolutely. Yes, I can hear you.
So an investor is there to make a judgment of risk to hopefully make outlier returns, and he or she or they are investing in the full package. Let me answer your question with a bit of a metaphor or an analogy, if you will. When you start off, it's just you, and you are in a rowing boat. Okay, maybe you've got one oar, and you're just rowing. Then you go to the other side to keep going straight, rowing, and you go to the other side and row, and that's you in a very small wooden boat. Then perhaps you manage to get your first hire. You bring on a co-founder, and you can both row at the same time. So suddenly you double your progress, your efficiency, and so on. It's much more camaraderie, and that you're still in the same wooden boat, but you're going much more efficient. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Then you manage to get some investment or some big client wins, and now you can afford to upgrade the boat. And so now you build, you still have the same boat, small little wooden boat, still the two of you. There is space for one more, but just the two of you are there, and you buy a little engine. Now you don't need the oars. So now not only can you turn quicker, but you can also go in a straight line and backwards and so on quicker. So you've got a little engine, and you still got space for one more in the boat. So you hire someone. So that person can now help you in navigating. Should you go left? Should you go right? That person sits on the boat. Now the boat is full. You got a small little boat. You started off with yourself just rowing. Now you got a co-founder and an employee and an engine. So things are good. Now you start to really navigate, but you can't go beyond the pier or the harbor walls, because that's where the big waves are. So what you need to do is go and buy a bigger boat. So you manage to buy a bigger boat, but it's not necessarily a cruise liner. It's a bigger boat, but you've got experience with a rowing boat. So it takes time for you to learn how to captain this bigger boat, and you need to hire one more person to help you crew this boat, and so on and so on. And you go from rowing boat to maybe blow up speedboat to a larger fishing boat, from a fishing boat to a faster boat, maybe to a yacht, and then perhaps to a cruise liner or something like that. The point I'm getting at here is that the skill set required for the rowing boat versus a cruise liner is different. More often than not, the people who are great at the rowing boat are not great at the cruise liners, and vice versa. It's not always the case, but more often than not. And so what does that mean? It means you as a founder need to constantly upskill yourself for the scenario ahead. Now, when we are evaluating risk, we're not evaluating if. We're evaluating when there will be struggles, hardship, difficulties, headwinds, rough seas, storms, and so on. So we're assessing the full package, not only the tech, not only the business, but we're assessing the clients, the go-to-market efforts, the capital efficiency, the caliber of the founders, the caliber of the hires and the senior leadership and the people operating, the revenue model, the speed at which you can develop and evolve your product to outcompete others, and so on and so on. And so we're evaluating the full picture, because we're investing not only in the oar or the propeller or the front of the boat or the back of the boat. We're investing in the full thing. Now, with that said, when should you pitch tech versus when should you pitch business? They go hand in hand. Tech enables business, which enables tech, which enables business, which enables tech. Does that help?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. And now, in additional question, you talked about the propeller thing and how we started with a small wooden boat and it goes all the way to a great cruise, right? Now, if I'm the co-founder of a company who want to create a bigger infrastructure and he sees from a smaller application to taking a research center or center of excellence in the terms of longevity. Now, in the very beginning, should I show this whole picture, the bigger picture to the investor, or should I show the very small chunks that I'm going to achieve in the very near future?
Great question. Yeah. Okay. When we first invest, the worst thing that can happen is if the business goes the startup goes out of business within 6 to 12 months. That means we didn't do our homework. It means we made the wrong decision, and the cost is double, because there's the cost of losing our money, but then there's the cost of the opportunity cost of putting that money into something else. So if we can do our job well, then that shouldn't happen. In your instance, you want to be thinking about not only your capital efficiency of how you're using that money, and you don't want to only showcase the milestones of like tomorrow and next week, because we need you to be thinking about that North Star vision. But the better you understand our business, the better you understand our cycle of how long we expect to return the funds at 10, 100, 1000x or so on, then the better you can start having a conversation with us around what we need to know when. Equally, you don't want to keep us in the dark and keep your investors in the dark. So the North Star is very important. Remember, I have never met you, Khaled, and I have never worked with you, and I certainly haven't got the industry knowledge or domain knowledge or lens on the world or your problem domain that you do. So don't assume that I'd have that. So if you can slowly educate me around the North Star, around the industry, around the problem, the scale of the problem, the pain of the problem felt, and so on that I've alluded to, then ultimately you can work backwards from that North Star to and bridge that gap between now and that North Star. There's a very difference between a pipe dream and a pipeline. So you've got to be managing your sales pipeline in a proficient capacity. And again, that's factual and objective. Either it's moving or it's not. And if it is moving, what is the velocity that it's moving and churning and hopefully converting at? But overall, we're always asking ourselves, whether you're talking about tech, whether you're talking about go-to-market, product roadmap, or business or hiring, we're asking, why you, why now? Why you, not you individually, Khaled, but why your business? Why AIA Longever?
Yeah.
And why now? Because I don't need to invest in AIA Longever, and I don't need to invest now. But your job is to make that curiosity turn into a desire, and that desire to turn into a need through storytelling capabilities and through the ability to showcase your business plan and share the North Star, but also showcase how you're actually tangibly, day in and day out, making progress towards that, making that North Star a reality.
Thank you very much, Elliot, for answering. And thank you, Khalid, for asking the two interesting questions. We have another 2 questions on the chat. Elliot, if you can also touch them. What is the
most important thing to manage in the early stages of startup development? Capital efficiency. Simple. What key attributes do investors look for in a founder's profile, and does the number of co-founders influence investor confidence? Terrific question. Thank you, Karina. Okay, let's start with the latter. Personally, I like 3. I like 3 co-founders. The reason being is because you can have 1 co-founder focused on sales and operations, 1 co-founder focused on fundraising and or sales, and you can have 1 co-founder focused on technology. Now, Why I like 3, not only because of the focus areas, but because of diversity of thought. The way that if me and Karina and Khalid were all on the same team and co-founders, the way we would all approach the same problem would be very different based upon our backgrounds and our skill set and our knowledge. And that creates a great and healthy environment for debate and discussion to be able to decide a way forward. And perhaps Karina or Khalid or whoever else is on my team has a different perspective that I have. And I might be right, I might be wrong, but we need to go and test that. Secondly, the other reason I like 3 is because if there are 3 co-founders and one decides, you know what, this is not for me, or I need to spend more time with my family, or I want to go and get a corporate job, or I just don't like you anymore, I don't like you guys, I don't like the startup world, then the business still has 2. They still have 2 key people moving the startup forward. And the equity from that person who's now left gets generally redistributed back to the company so that either a new co-founder can come or an internal hire can be promoted. In terms of traits, I cannot emphasize how important this is at the early stages more than ever, but definitely at the later stages is applicable. Grit, determination, hard work, forthcomingness, transparency, trustworthiness, coachability, communication are all things that are being assessed in addition to the business, the tech, the defensibility, and so on. I hope that answers your question. I wish we had hours and hours to discuss things. So interesting. Thanks, Khalid. That's very kind. So I'm going to wrap up with this very, very quickly. Okay. When do you know the title should not be what makes a startup investable? Well, it kind of is, but it's more like when should you go and fundraise? So let's do this very quickly, and I promise I'll be quick, Carmen. Okay. 1, what is my idea? As I said, love the problem, be agnostic to the solution, and be even more agnostic to the product. Once you've defined your idea, can your idea be valued at $1 billion within 5 years? That's what you need to ask yourself. Can it be valued at $1 billion in 5 years? Now, to value something is very subjective, but there's plenty of different ways to do so. You can look at revenue multiples, you can look at comparables, but ultimately, is this a big enough market for me that if I take 1% of or 0.5% of, that I can be valued at a 1 billion valuation, i.e. is my TAM 100 billion or 200 billion or more? If yes, let's go to the next step. The next step, that should say go to step 2. Hold on, why is it not working? There you go, is build the MVP. With Replit, Lovable, Claude, and so many others, it has never been easier and quicker and more accessible and more democratized to build MVPs in a matter of hours or days, not weeks, months, or even years. So build an MVP. If you've managed to build an MVP, there's no point keeping that as a website in your garage, on your laptop, in closed doors. You need to go out to the market and you need to go to stage 4 and test that MVP. Go and test it with what's called your ICP, your ideal customer profile. If you don't know what that is, speak to the Creates Apps team, ask them to run a whole session on ICPs and how defining them and aligning your ICP definition to your product, to your problem domain, to your go-to-market efforts is really, really important. And you've got to test it. And honestly, test it and get it wrong. Prove yourself wrong, because then you can know when to cut things off. If you're spending $1,000 a day on Facebook ads, for example, and you don't know what's performing well and what's not, after 30 days, you just have lots of random data and $30,000 in the minus if that's not generated you returns. What you ought to do is go, I'm going to put $100 a day for 30 days, get some data, and I'm going to study that data. It turns out that the advert in red is much better than the advert in blue. I'm going to cut the advert in blue and double down the rest of my $27,000 in the advert in red, for example. Does that make sense? So always test. Build, test, measure, learn. Build, test, measure, learn. It's a very important cycle to be front of mind as you grow your business at any stage, whether it's for hiring someone, whether it's for should I buy X or should I buy Y? Should I go with supplier A? Should I go with supplier B? Should I fundraise $1 million? Should I fundraise $500,000? Or otherwise, always have that framework front of mind. If indeed you manage to you build your MVP, you test it with your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and now there's evidence of traction. Evidence of traction I've alluded to: waiting lists, pre-sales, recurring revenue, people making viral referrals to you, to their friends, and so on. Then you're at a point where you can actually start to approach investors. Now, the first type of investors you would approach would be your friends and family. Second type, I'm going in maturity. So the earliest stage would be your friends and family. Then your friends and family plus one. Then you're probably going to be ready for angel investors. These are typically high net worth individuals that might be just 1 or 2 connections away from you. Then from there, you're looking at angel syndicates and angel groups. From angel groups, that's when early stage institutional VC funds like Orsia Capital would be getting involved. And then from there, you're looking at later stage and growth stage VCs, and then eventually private equity and possibly public markets. So when you pitch, we're not going to go into that today because I believe Carmen mentioned that you have already covered it in your Create Apps initiative. But fundamentally, prioritize investors. If you want to pitch to Orsia Capital, you kind of only have one chance to do that. And then if it's a no, it's not a no forever, but the door could be closed for 6 months. So really think about how you're going to approach them, who you're going to approach, why, and so on. Spray and pray doesn't generally work. Being bespoke and customized indeed does. I'm going to leave you with a couple of points. Your job when fundraising as a founder, although many of you may be far off from it, it's worth knowing, is to build and control momentum. If I'm looking to invest and Carmen's looking to invest, you can kind of play us against each other, but by the way, speak to each other all the time. So I'll just call Carmen and say, hey, Jonathan said that you're looking at investing. And she might say, actually, no, we passed on that like 2 months ago. I'm like, okay, well, great. So he's bluffing me and I'm out. So don't lie, but you've got to build and control momentum in a persuasive capacity. Never, ever stop practicing, rehearsing, and improving your ability to tell stories. Tell stories for your hires, for your employees, to motivate people, to keep your investors updated, to bring new investors on board, to sell to your clients. Storytelling, whether you're building a shoe company, a laptop company, a software company, or anything in between, is the most important skill set that everyone ought to prioritize and really narrow and hone in on. Perception is reality. We won't remember necessarily, or VC won't necessarily remember your growth rates from Q2 to Q3 in 2025 for the particular startup that you're building. But they might remember, oh yeah, that guy who's got a dog as his logo. Could be something as random as that. Okay. Literally, we're all human at the end of the day. So I can't remember 200 or 400 startups per month, but I certainly there are certain things that can stand out and make it memorable, just like things that you would find memorable as well. But perception is reality. So it's important that you recognize that. And you want to win internal champions. That means persuading someone like me to be able to advocate for your business internally when you're not there, so that I can wave your flag with my internal stakeholders. Remember, if they're a team of 10, then let's say 10, each of those people are seeing 10 startups a day. That's 100 startups a day that the firm is seeing. So you've got to persuade that, one of those 10 people, that you should be one of those 100 that day to be debated internally. And that's very realistic and actual in terms of the numbers. Finally, I will wrap up with something I hope is memorable, and I'm sorry we've overrun. The average successful VC and startup relationship is longer than the average marriage globally. You are marrying your VC investor. Would you marry me if you just pinged me on LinkedIn? No, probably not. So due diligence is the process of evaluating whether they want to metaphorically be married together and do business together for 5, 7, or 10 years, possibly longer. And you want to evaluate the VC or the investor as much as they are evaluating you. There's a million more things I could share today, but we've already run over time. I wish you all the best with your endeavors, with the championship, and with your future growth. If and when you get to pre-seed stage or seed stage, feel free to apply to the Sandbox investment program that I talked about at the beginning, which is here. And where is it? Here. And we are launching a new program for idea to pre-seed. It's not public knowledge, so don't tell anyone, but I'll be in touch with Carmen. And when we launch it, which is very, very soon, many of you will fit that criteria and you will have the opportunity, it's a founder residency program, to build alongside Borussia Capital. I'm gonna leave it at that for now. Have a great day. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, Elliot. Really, really appreciated the time and sharing your knowledge with all of us. It was really insightful, engaging, and I personally enjoy a lot. So I hope that everybody leave the session learning something that they can apply. So thank you very much. Now I will hand over to Aisha Bintuk from the Dubai Chamber of Digital Economy, that she's here with us today. Aisha, welcome.
Hi, Carmen. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all the finalists for your active engagement throughout today's session. I know there has been a lot of content to digest, but I hope that you all benefited from them. We would also like to extend our sincere appreciation to Alia Global and Borussia Capital for their time, for their valuable insights, and for hosting this informative session. We hope that the knowledge shared today helps you navigate the next stages of the competition and your entrepreneurial journey. And we look forward to seeing your continued growth and success. We're always here to help you. So if there is anything that we can support you with, feel free to reach out to us. And I hope you have a great day ahead.